This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
Since my retirement at the end of last year, I've spent the last 3 months working with companies ranging from small startups to large multinationals, helping to advise them and come in and give them some honest, unfiltered feedback on their overall innovation programs. The net result is I've started to see a common theme across all of these companies, irrespective of the size. And I've collected those down into what I refer to as the 5 biggest risks to innovation that I've seen inside these organizations. Now, these are, again, common irrespective of the size of the organization. And it's a little bit of a surprise to me, thinking that larger organizations would have larger problems and smaller organizations, being small and nimble, would be able to kind of avoid some of these traps. But in reality, it doesn't matter what organization you're involved in, you're going to come across one or more of these 5 risks, or sometimes I refer to them as roadblocks, things that get in the way from the overall success of your innovation programs. So, what's number one? Number one is the existence of the corporate antibodies. Now, there's a previous podcast that goes into a lot of detail about the corporate antibodies, and in fact, there's an entire chapter in my book, Beyond the Obvious, on corporate antibodies. But what I want to talk about here specifically is the tolerance of antibodies by leadership. Every organization has antibodies, and in some cases, antibodies aren't always a bad thing. They help protect the organization from taking uncontrolled risks that could be detrimental to the company or the organization. But the fact of the matter is that most antibodies are just basically roadblocks, speed bumps, or people who are actually working counter to innovation and new ideas coming in. Now, what's upsetting to me, though, is the tolerance of these corporate antibodies by leaders. Leaders know they exist. Leaders even know who those people are, and they know that some of these people are actually being harmful to the organization. But leaders still tolerate them. And for what reason, I can't get a grasp on this. True leaders should step in and either correct that behavior or remove those people out of the organization. Because all they are is they're just basically holding the organization back from the opportunity for success. And these antibodies just tend to get built up over time. And if one person who's a very strong antibody never gets corrected by leaders, then other people feel empowered to be more like them. And you now set up a model that is actually counter to being an innovative organization. And in some cases, that kind of repetitive, nature of, hey, that person is fairly negative to ideas, yet they're successful and they've got a great career in the company. I'm going to act more like them because that's what's needed to be successful in this company. And the result is you now have a corporate antibody culture versus an innovation culture. So, number one, the biggest risks to innovation that I've come across is this existence of the corporate antibodies, but more importantly, not just that they exist, but that leaders tolerate them and let them literally get ingrained as part of the culture. The second of the biggest risks to innovation that I've come across over the last few months working with companies is lack of patience. Everybody thinks innovation needs to be the quick fix, right? I'm getting these phone calls from CEOs and board members of major corporations inquiring about, what could be the impact of innovation into their organization. And in the process of the conversation, it invariably goes, we need a 30-day fix. We need a 90-day fix. We're desperate. Our share price is down. We're going to be late with our next generation of products, and the market's killing us. Can you come in and help? And my answer to them is you should have been thinking about this 2-3 years ago. Innovation's not the quick fix, not at least organic innovation. There's other things you can do, like innovation for mergers and acquisitions or potentially co-innovation programs that will allow you to significantly accelerate. But in reality, innovation takes time. It's patience. You need to have a robust innovation pipeline. You need to manage that pipeline. You need to keep that pipeline full. And you need to set expectations that the innovation teams, whether they be in R&D or marketing or operations, that they need to deliver on the innovation promise on a regular basis. Not, we do innovation and maybe something comes out of it. But this lack of patience is really being manifested today because companies now are realizing that they need ideas. They need a pipeline of ideas in order to win or even stay in their current position. And they've ignored it for so long that now all of a sudden they want the quick fix. And that is incredibly tough to do. Now, there are some companies that I've been able to help that have had, something hidden inside the organization that you're able to actually grab, accelerate, and launch. But there generally needs to be this concept of patience. Need to set the expectations that innovation takes time, that it will deliver, but it does take time. And I've just found that everybody gets the religion of innovation when their back's against the wall, but at that point in time, they want the fix now. So there's just this general lack of patience. The third area is what I call the ambiguous process, right? Organizations want to do innovation. They want to encourage their employees to be part of the innovation programs, and they should be excited and it should invigorate the organization. The problem is there's an ambiguous process. If some person inside the organization or some customer or somebody out in the world has an idea for your company, who do they send it to? What is the process? Now, if you can't sit down right at this moment and say, here is the process, here is the contact, here's how that idea will be evaluated, here's how we communicate back to those people who submitted ideas, then you don't have a process. Your process is ambiguous. And as soon as you have an ambiguous process, people get frustrated. And when people get frustrated, they're not engaged in your innovation agenda. The objective of every organization should be to get 100% of the ecosystem, employees, leaders, executives, partners, customers, 100% of the ecosystem engaged in your innovation agenda. And the way to do that is to be clear about what the process is, how they can get engaged in the process, how they can track your process, how they can feel like they're contributing to the process, and how ultimately decisions are made and things are funded, etc. Because without that transparency and without that process, people will just not engage. They will not participate. So no matter how hard you up there and you pound the podium or you put the word innovation in your annual report, if the process is ambiguous, people will get frustrated and people will not engage. The fourth biggest risk to innovation is what I call unprotected resources. With innovation, it does take some form of resource in the form of time, money, people, equipment to bring innovations to fruition. And the problem is that resources that get assigned typically sometimes will get pulled away, or there's a culture within your organization that says, we give people the 20% time rule, kind of the Google rule, or it used to be the HP rule where people would take Fridays off to work on special projects. In this case, the problem is that that's one person's time, and yes, you can get multiple people together, but ultimately, when an innovation is going to move forward and it's going to have the impact, you need to commit resources. And once you commit those resources, then you have to protect them. No matter how tempting or how bad things get in other parts of the organization, you need to have the discipline to protect those resources. If there's truly an innovation program that's critical to the success of your organization, you need to commit those resources and you need to go hands off. You need to let those resources focus on delivering that innovation impact. Typically what happens is you put some really good people on that, then some fire breaks out in another part of the organization. So what do people do? They reach into the innovation team and they, quote, borrow that person to go fight the fire. And then you drop them back in. You can't do that. That's starting and stopping the process. You frustrate the team. The team clearly gets the message that their work is not important, and therefore they feel like they get let off the hook of needing to be able to deliver the innovation impact. So resources need to be protected. And the fifth area is a poorly defined BHAG. Now, just remind you, BHAG is the bold, hairy, audacious goal. This is setting the bar high for the team such that it's really a stretch and they've got to go through and create something that's going to be really mind-blowing, something that's going to radically change your company, your industry, whatever it is, right? The example I like to use for the BHAG is John F. Kennedy putting out the BHAG that we were going to put man on the moon before the end of the decade. A poorly defined BHAG does not give clarity to the team on what constitutes success. The clearer that you can define the success, what is the goal line, and when they cross that goal line, they know they've crossed it and they know they've been successful. The more clarity that you can bring to defining that goal line in the form of a BHAG, the motivation that you inject in the team is immeasurable. The problem is that we tend to try to go vague. Oh, we need a new market-leading product. Well, there's lots of different ways that you can define markets, right? So I can say, I'm going to create a gadget, and the market segment for this is, guys who are 17 and a half years old, who have blonde hair and like the color purple. Oh, I'm the market-leading product in that category. You need to define the BHAG such that it is clearly a monumental step up to win. There is a clearly defined goal line, and that everybody in the organization is aligned behind it, right? Going back to the John F. Kennedy example, President Kennedy said we were going to put man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that was the BHAG. You knew when it was, timeline, end of the decade. Man on the moon, meaning you got a person standing on the moon. Now, what he didn't do is he didn't go through and say, oh, we're going to do it by a 3-stage rocket, we're going to do a slingshot approach to get... No, he set the BHAG, and then he let the team solve the problems in order to achieve the goal. Where I've seen more and more organizations out there is either they don't define the BHAG at all, or they so poorly define it that it actually injects confusion into the organization. Organizations that take time and really sit down and really get crystallized on what that BHAG is see some phenomenal success in their programs. So again, the 5 biggest risk innovations that I've seen over the last 3 months in the work that I've been doing since I retired, helping companies. And again, this is everything from large multinationals to 10-person startups. And the problems they've run into all fall into these categories. Corporate antibodies. Not that they exist and they're always going to exist. But leadership's tolerance for bad behavior in the form of corporate antibodies, and leaders not willing to take action to either correct the behavior or remove the behavior. Corporate antibodies, big problem. Second, lack of patience. Because of leadership's poor planning, don't put the burden on somebody else to go solve your problem overnight. Patience. Commit and get your pipeline going, and then let patience kick in to let that teams or those teams within your organizations to work the innovation programs. Third, ambiguous process. Anywhere there's ambiguity in the overall program, people will disengage. Because let's face it, innovation is hard. You don't need to make it harder on people just by having a process that's ill-defined or, there's no clarity, there's no transparency, there's no understanding of how decisions are being made. It just seems to be this random, somebody in the senior ranks randomly picks a program, and that's what we all go off and do. Need to define the process. Get rid of any ambiguity in the program. Fourth, unprotected resources. If you commit the resource, commit it. Have the discipline. Yes, it's painful, right? You know that you've assigned your A team to this innovation program, but you really could use that one person to come help solve a firefight problem at a customer site. Have the discipline. Commit to the resources and protect them. Don't let leaders or managers get in there and muddy up the issues of resources and such. Protect the resources. The fifth area, poorly defined BHAG. The better you define the BHAG, the better you're going to have from the standpoint of motivation, gelling the team together, all of them clearly aligned with those long-term objectives. And the ultimate deliverable that you get will be mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing, if you spend the time putting together the BHAG. I hope this was helpful. These are just the 5 more common ones that I've come across. These are kind of the overlaps. There are others that were very much, company specific, but I wanted to gel this down into literally the 5 that I see as common across industries, across geographies, across size of companies. And I'm sure within your organization, you're seeing 1, 2, or maybe all 5 of these. So what are you supposed to do? You've identified that, yes, we have this problem. What is it that you can do as an innovation leader within your organization? Well, one is don't try to solve all 5 off the bat. Pick the ones that you can go fight the battle. So, for instance, you're never going to win the corporate antibody battle going head on. You've got to solve the antibody problem by delivering and showing results in other parts of the organization to kind of get over the negative inertia. I would actually recommend that you focus on the BHAG. What are those bold, hairy, audacious goals that you can give to your teams that will deliver innovation results to the organization? The other one is ambiguous process. Fix the process so there's clarity within the organization. So therefore, you can get more and more people engaged, more and more people understanding how the process works. The lack of patience and unprotected resources, that requires executive leadership. It requires finding a mentor, finding somebody in a senior role who you can kind of bring into the process and have them help you put together kind of the corporate culture of patience. And once resources are committed, that resources become protected. And then the last one, which is the corporate antibodies. And that just takes a senior leader stepping up. If you are that senior leader, then step up. But senior leaders need to step up and say, what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior when it comes to the innovation programs. So I would suggest you focus on the BHAG and the process. Those are things that you can control directly. 2, find a senior leader that you can partner with, or if you are that senior leader, take a leadership role and do this, which is inject in your culture a culture of patience when it comes to innovation. It takes time. Get used to it. And also about protecting resources. When senior leaders commit resources, the team and the organization knows that that is a commitment, that leaders are going to follow through on their word when it says that we're going to commit these resources to develop these innovation programs. And then last but not least, and one of the biggest annoyances in the organization is these antibodies. But you got to deal with them. And I would actually encourage you to listen to the previous podcast where I went into a lot of detail on the corporate antibodies, or read chapter 3 in my book, Beyond the Obvious, where I dedicated an entire chapter to just teaching you some of the tricks and tools on how to get around corporate antibodies, or how to get the corporate antibodies to actually support your idea, not fight against your idea. With that, I'm going to wrap up this week's podcast. Thank you for the time for listening. Like I said in the podcast, there's a number of references to this one tied specifically to the book. You can pick up Beyond the Obvious at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and independent booksellers. It's available in hardcover. It's available in digital. It's also available as an audiobook. Get a hold of the book. It's got a lot of material in there, kind of giving you the insights of my lessons learned, but not just me, but what other companies are doing using this methodology to help fuel their innovation programs and some exciting success that those companies have had. If you have feedback, suggestions, questions about anything in the podcast, the blog, or the book, email me at feedback@philmckinney.com. Also, What I would ask is one favor. As you know, if you've been a regular listener to the podcast, that really my purpose of doing the podcast is my way of paying it forward. Early in my career, I was the beneficiary of a phenomenal mentor who invested a huge amount of time early in my career to really give me a foundation that allowed me to be successful. When I asked that mentor how I could pay it back, his answer was, you can't. What I had to do was pay it forward. When I got later in my career, find a way to share my expertise and knowledge with others. And so therefore, that's really the motivation for the podcast. Why all the podcast material is available under Creative Commons license is basically my way of sharing with you my learnings and my expertise that I've built out over my 30-plus year career. All I ask for you is to pay it forward. Tell other people about the podcast, link to the podcast from your blog sites, repost, retweet the messages that get sent out from the podcast. Any of that would be immensely helpful, and I would truly, truly appreciate it. With that, I'm going to wrap this up. Again, thank you for the time out of your busy schedule to listen to the podcast. I look forward to hearing from you, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.